Hi, I'm Mia Friedman, and this is No Filter. Janine Middleton is not who you would expect to be the CEO of Australian marriage equality. She's not lesbian, she's not gay, she's not bisexual or transgender or queer or questioning, and she's not intersex. And in fact, no one in her immediate family is either. Janine is in her late 50s, she's a former investment banker, she lives on Sydney's very conservative North Shore, her local member is Tony Abbott, and she wears pearls, not just on special occasions, but pretty much every time she leaves the house. And yet, she is on the front lines, pushing for marriage equality in Australia, and she needs you to be too. Janine has some pretty fantastic stories to tell about how she got here, as well as an urgent message for all straight women over 35. If that's you, you'll want to hear it. Here's Janine. Janine Middleton, you are not LGTB or I.
No.
What are you doing here?
A lot of people ask me that question because I've been doing this 3 years now, and I'm not exactly the person that people expect, sitting in my pearls, my colours and paddy suit. And
you do strike me as a Liberal voter.
Liberal voter, Catholic, ex-investment banker. I've been married to my husband for nearly 21 years. Incredibly conservative person. I consider myself a very conservative person. And I volunteered 3 years ago for lots of reasons. It's kind of a long story. You
volunteered with the marriage equality campaign.
I volunteered with Australian marriage equality.
Why? How did that come about?
It came about, it was funny because initially I thought it came about because of Ian Thorpe. And I know that sort of sounds strange because I've never met him. I still haven't met him, even though he's an ambassador of ours. But he came out in 2014. And when he came out, I was really moved by it to a point where I just kept crying around the house. And I'm thinking, oh, for goodness sake. And my husband's sort of thinking, oh, for goodness sake, woman, I thought we were past that in your life, of me always crying.
Look up the HRT.
Yeah, exactly. And I just really couldn't understand it. And it just sort of came to me that if Ian Thorpe took all that time to come out, and if he struggled with coming out, and people like Magda Szubanski struggle with coming out, and these are two fantastic Australian icons who could go into any house in the country and be welcome for a cup of tea. If they struggled, then what was the hope of, the guy in the western suburbs or a young girl in Ballarat? And that's when I thought, this isn't acceptable. This really isn't acceptable. And, David Hurley said that the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. And I just thought, no, I want to live in a country where everyone is equal under the law. And I think if people aren't all equal under the law, then it makes us all lesser somehow, that we are tolerating that. And I also think where there's institutionalised discrimination, which is basically what this is, it allows for softer discrimination to happen.
What do you mean by that?
Well, just inappropriate language, jokes, oh, they're different, that kind of thing, and stuff that women put up with. I'm 58, and when I started work in the 80s, and particularly in investment banking, being a woman was pretty difficult.
So you you identified that with that sense of being an outsider a little bit, or not being treated equally?
Yes, there was a young guy that I've always had gay friends my entire life, never really thought about it, never thought about the politics of it until I became managing director at JP Morgan in London. And then you start looking at things sort of from a different point of view. And the bank was trying really, really hard to be more open and inclusive to LGBTI staff. And I had gay guys in my team, and they just wouldn't come out. And I was because we were mainly expats, it was more family than, sort of team.
So when you say they wouldn't come out, how did you know that they were gay, and in what way could you see them checking themselves and sort of editing what they said or how they behaved? They
never quite talked about what they did on the weekend, who they went on holidays with. You never saw their holiday photos. If they came to your house for dinner or you went to the pub on a Friday night, it was, oh no, couldn't get a date, can't get any women in London, when you're thinking, I don't think you're really actually looking for a woman, and just not being able to be themselves. And a couple of years after I left, one of the guys who I'm still very close to, I said to him, it was really interesting because I said to him, why didn't why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you feel comfortable?
So he eventually did after you
Eventually
left.
came out. And he said to me, two things he said to me. One, he said, I wanted to be the good VP. I didn't want to be the gay VP. But he also said to me, I saw the way women were treated in the bank. And he said, you know, he didn't want any tokenism around him. And, you know, I was one of 6 female managing directors in the investment bank. And there were probably 150 male managing directors. And so that kind of took me back a bit, to be honest, because I'm thinking, really, and this is 2009 that this happened. So he was certainly looking at women who I guess he saw as the other group in the bank who there was discrimination against, even though at that point, obviously, it was kind of reasonably passive.
And you also had a friend that you knew in London who became ill, who also hadn't really come out. Tell me about her.
That was, oh gosh, that's a very emotional story. We were 2 Australians living in London, didn't really socialise together, but, you know, 2 Australians, you sort of chat to each other if we ran into each other on the floor in the canteen or something, and we'd just talk about the cricket, the weather, you know, complaining about all sorts of things in England and saying what we missed about Australia. And she did become ill, and she knew that I had been seriously ill in my life and had survived. So she wanted to talk.
Did you have cancer?
Yeah. And yes, and I was given 6 months to live at one point and managed to kind of turn that around. And she I think she was very interested firstly in what I did and how I dealt with cancer.
The diagnosis.
And the diagnosis, but also treatments and that sort of thing. And when you have had a potentially terminal illness, you can talk in a way to someone who is in the same situation that other people can't. They just really can't identify the emotions and the roller coaster that you go through.
And sometimes you need to say things that are too upsetting for anyone else around you to hear.
Yeah, and it can be a really honest, open conversation. And she used to call me at night because nighttime is the worst time for people who are seriously ill because of the nightmares and the worries and the fears, and, you know, the world's gone quiet, and of course then their mind gets very noisy about worrying about their situation. Anyway, we used to literally have these conversations about life and death, and people use that phrase, but this was literally life and death. And I knew she was gay, but she didn't tell me. And I thought, oh, well, we've got other things that we're kind of talking about pretty important. And so she just didn't feel that she needed to talk about it. Anyway, unfortunately, she got worse, and she was in the London clinic in London, and I was going to see her, and it was pretty sure it was going to be the last time I was going to see her. And that's a pretty shocking situation for anyone, you know, who's been through that understands. And I was in the back of the cab and I was thinking, you know, I need to be strong and I need to be brave, but I need to be able to tell how I feel, but, you know, not make her sort of worse than she already was. So I was kind of struggling with all those emotions. And I went into the room where she was, and she was sitting there holding her girlfriend's hand. And just, you know, for a second I thought, it was just lovely. You know, it was just lovely.
Had you met the girlfriend before?
No, never.
And she hadn't referred to her?
No, ever. Never.
But you straight away knew what the story was.
And it was really sweet moment because my friend looked happy in an incredibly difficult situation. So as soon as she saw me, my friend, she sort of threw down this poor girl's hand and quite literally barked at her and said, you know, get out of the room and don't come back until, Janine's gone. And everything I was thinking in the back of the taxi just fell away, and now I was just angry because I was kind of angry with her, but I was also angry with. We live in a society where someone is dying, and they are still editing their life on their deathbed, and her life was cut short by cancer, but it was also cut. It was not a full life lived because she couldn't be herself all the time.
Did you talk to her about it?
No, it was too late, to be honest. It was just too late. And the next time I saw her was at her funeral. And like a lot of LGBTI funerals, they are whitewashed by the family. You know, your girlfriend becomes a friend. You know, they have no role in the service. And this is a story that you'll hear a lot from the LGBTI community that, you know,
that many people would never even think about.
Never even.
I've heard about those funerals where they're all their friends who know them in their full life, and then there's the sort of the family or the work colleagues, and it's this stilted.
And even worse, we know so many stories where a younger person has died and they've been ostracised from their family, but then when they die, the family just sweeps in and just takes over, and the person who's been living with them for 5-10 years or whatever just doesn't have a role at all. And that's what this debate that we're kind of having in Australia at the moment is all about. It's having equal relationships. And if I went to the hospital with my husband, and when I did have to go to the hospital he was coming with me, I guess, this is my husband, nothing else has to be said. Like, it's just, okay, he's the next kin and he gets to say if she can't speak for herself and all those sorts of things. That doesn't happen with lesbian and gay couples. It's not automatic. I mean, we had that terrible story, if you remember, in Adelaide, where that British couple came down on their honeymoon and one of them died in a terrible accident. And, his husband had no rights whatsoever. And, how can that be? They were married. They were married in the same way that, I'm married.
And what's marriage meant to you?
Marriage has been... I didn't ever really think I'd get married. I was in my 30s when I got married. And it's been just a sense of, I think, joy and commitment. And I think standing there, and we were married in a church, and standing there in front of family and, God, and saying that you love someone and you're going to be with them the rest of your life. It's been wonderful.
Your whole face changes when I ask you that question. It's lovely to see.
No, he's a very special man, yeah.
The no voters would say, well, gay couples can have all of that. Same-sex couples can have all of that. Why do they need the word? Why do they need the word marriage?
But they don't have that. I think there is confusion by people as to the rights that LGBTI people have under the law. It varies in every state, of course, but they don't have all the same rights as a married couple. But also, I think in our society, marriage is an accepted institution of a loving, committed couple. And I'd known my husband for, years before we got married. There was actually 11 years between him proposing and me accepting. So we had really, that's
you
another
don't
story.
rush into things.
I don't rush. No, I was definitely making sure I understood the situation I was getting myself into. But so part of me was, okay, we're getting married, but is it really going to make that much of a difference? But the following day, I felt completely different, because we had committed to each other for the rest of our lives. And that gives you, I think, a deep connection that when you're just living together is missing.
You mentioned God just then about when you got married, you stood in front of God. And I've spoken to people I know who are religious or who practice their faith, and they say the Bible says marriage is between a man and a woman. That's just what the Bible says. What's the argument against that?
To me, the God that I believe in is a loving God, and that they created us all equally, and I think we should all be treated equally. And I think, the Bible is one of those documents you can kind of pick and choose.
You can, can't you?
Which clauses that you want. And it's been really interesting, the amount of religious support that we have actually had from groups that you wouldn't necessarily expect. I mean, we have rabbis for marriage equality, and we've had in the last 24 hours, which has been completely remarkable, we have had two bishops come out, one from Newcastle and one from Parramatta, and have written beautiful pieces. And that's what they talk about. They talk about love, and they talk about the fact that the church hasn't always been kind to LGBTI people, but it has to be a welcoming place. One of the things that I think about, though, also, I think people forget marriage. When you get married in the church, you're actually having two ceremonies at once, because you're having the civil and you're having the religious. But obviously a lot of people, I think it's something like 73% of people in Australia now get married by marriage celebrants. Yeah. So for my nieces, and they're at that age where, there's lots of weddings to go to in their late 20s, early 30s, they don't go to church weddings.
I think I've been to one church wedding, maybe 2. I wasn't married in a church, and most people aren't. Marriage is essentially a civil and a legal institution in an institution of human rights, really.
And I think the other side obviously there's a lot of red herrings out there and they try to blur it. And we are not and have never asked for the church to marry same-sex couples. We are just asking that marriage celebrants are able to marry same-sex couples.
Janine, you don't have, someone would say, you don't have a dog in this fight. You don't have skin in this game. You don't have children or immediate family. You're not LGBTQ yourself. How do you explain to people why you feel so passionately? Because I struggle with this sometimes too.
Yeah.
My immediate family so far, 2 of my children are quite young, but I'm in the same position as you, and yet I feel so incredibly passionately about it. How do you explain that to people?
I think the bottom line is because it's the right thing. I think it's just about being what type of Australia do I want to live in? I'm very proud to be Australian. I love this country. I think we're incredibly lucky to live here, and I don't think we always appreciate how lucky we are to live here. And it's about, we're a country about a fair go, and we are a country that cares about each other. And so to me, it's just all part of that. I think we are at a point in history here, and I think we need to recognise that we are at a point in history. And I think in the future, people will look back on this and there will be embarrassment that this actually ever took place. Because one of the things, this postal survey is obviously horrendous.
Why do you say it's? I agree, but why do you say to people if they say, "Oh, but we're just all having a say"? What's horrendous about it?
A couple of things. The first thing that I find completely abhorrent is the fact that because the government won't make a decision in Canberra, which is basically what their job is and how this should have been solved, it means that LGBTIQ Australians have to now stand up and ask their fellow Australians, is it okay for them to be themselves, and is it okay for their relationships to be treated with dignity and respect? And I don't think a lot of people actually look at it that way, but that is what has happened, and that is what is happening now. And so who am I, quite frankly, to judge?
What business is it of ours?
It's no business of
It's not going to affect our marriage
at all. And no,
our sexuality.
I'll be no less married. It's not going to impact on my marriage at all.
Or no more gay.
And yes, and my husband will still be my husband, and I'll still be me. And so I don't think people look at it that way, and I think they really do need to look at it that way. And one of the things that really concerns me is a lot of people say, oh, yes, we support marriage equality, but it's getting them out to vote. And to be perfectly honest with you, for us to win this vote, it's going to be won by women.
Why is it going to be won by women?
Because women are the culture carriers of our society, and they are the ones that are going to talk to their kids, and they're going to talk to their nieces and nephews, and they're going to talk to their parents, and they're going to talk to their husbands. And this is basically a vote that's taking place around the kitchen table. And it's mum that probably brings in the mail, and she'll be the one that will say, okay, the surveys are here, guys, and let's have the conversation about how we're going to vote. And she'll be the one that goes and puts them in the post box, because I know look at my godsons, if it was up to them, it'd be in their gym bag and they'd sort of like pull it out in 8 months' time. So it will be the women who will be organising the family,
the gatekeepers of the admin.
Absolutely. We all know what that's like. If we don't do it, it doesn't get done. And so it is very much up to the women, and I think if the women do support, then this will happen. And I also think women, just because of the roles we have, mother, sister, auntie, godmother, grandmother, that they take a broader view of, if one of my sons was gay, then I would want him to have equal rights, or one of my grandchildren. So I think it's funny, I've spoken to a lot of older women about this. Now, my mum's 89, but I've also spoken to other older women about this, and they are actually quite supportive. And that surprises people. But I think the reason they're supportive is they've seen a lot in their lives. They know life is short and precious, And
they've also seen the evolution of institutions. They've seen the evolution of marriage.
Yeah. Something's wrong here, and it needs to be. It's time. I think it's time. I think society is at a point where it's definitely time. And there are 1 billion people in the world today who live in countries that have same-sex marriage. And I think a lot of people don't realise that either.
1 billion people.
1 billion people. And guess what? Sky hasn't fallen in. And all the things that our opponents would say are going to happen haven't happened. I mean, there are countries that have had marriage for years. Spain, I think, 12 years now. And Spain's strict Catholic, country. And I look at countries like Malta. Malta had marriage equality this year. Now, 2 years ago, you couldn't get divorced in Malta. So in 2 years, that evolution
It's embarrassing, isn't it? We're the only Western democracy left, aren't we?
We are.
How can we be so behind?
Well, I'd like to know the answer to that question, and I think the answer is that there are a group of people sitting in Canberra who are putting their religion, quite frankly, before people's rights in this country, and I think it actually just comes down to that.
Janine, have you lost friends over this?
No.
How do you deal with people in your life who are going to vote no?
If people vote no, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But I do ask that for anyone who's going to vote, that they have an informed decision, that they've really thought about it. And it's not just no on a whim or no because they've heard some ridiculous statements being made and they've sort of believed them. I think we, I guess, as heterosexual Australians, owe it to the LGBTI community to, out of respect, to just make sure we are informed on the arguments, on the facts, and that we've made an informed choice. And once you've made an informed choice, if it's no, then that's fine.
What's the best way to do that? Because everyone's got, as Kellyanne Conway would say, there are many alternative facts. Everyone's got their own facts. The No campaign.
The alternative truth.
Yeah. The No campaign is trying to make it about all sorts of things that have nothing to do with this postal survey.
I think when people get the survey, they need to think there's one question, and only one question on the survey, because there's only one issue here. And the issue is about, can two people of the same sex get married? That's it. It's not about schools. It's not about anything else. It's not about whether or not you like the government.
It's not about gender.
It's not about electricity prices.
It's not about the curriculum.
No, it's not about anything.
It's not about climate change.
No. It's just about that. And so they need to just think about that issue. And
it's not about political correctness or freedom of speech.
No, that was really, I have to say, I was quite shocked by that comment. I think it came pretty well on day one of the campaign. Tony Abbott, who's my local member. And I was really shocked because I thought, what a low blow. To me, he'd gone to the Trump handbook, page 1, and pulled something out, and that was to make this about political correctness. And I think that was an absolutely disgusting comment for him to make.
Why?
Because he immediately he said, I believe in Australian people and they can have a discussion and they can have an honest discussion, blah, blah, blah. And then the first thing out of his mouth was dishonest, because this isn't about political correctness.
Or freedom of speech or wedding cakes.
No wedding cakes or hairdressers or florists. But, that's what they'll do. And I think we know that the opposition do this because they know they've lost the argument on marriage, because when you speak to Australians, the majority of Australians, and of course not everyone, but the majority of Australians will say, yep, sounds fine. If that's what they want to do, they can do that. And of course you get people like my husband saying, really, they can be as miserable as the rest of us who are married. But it's a falsehood to say this is about political correctness. It really is. And I just thought it was poor form, not cricket, as we would say here.
Not cricket. And I was, the ABC have got that great tool where you can go and look at the different electorates around Australia. Yep. And Tony Abbott's electorate, in which you live, I think there's 70% of the electorate are in favour of marriage equality.
Oh, he's completely out of step with the electorate, but he's also out of step with his own family. His sister, of course, Christine, and her wonderful partner. And I think he's also out of step with, from my understanding, with his wife and daughters.
I can't imagine his wife and daughters being on that page. So what would you say to people who think, oh, look, it'll happen. Of course it'll happen. I mean, obviously it'll happen.
Well, for people who say that, my answer is yes, and people didn't vote for Hillary because they thought no one would vote for Trump. And people didn't bother to vote at Brexit because they thought there was absolutely no way they'd leave the EU. And that's what happens when people don't stand up. And, I mean, I think it's unfortunate that this is not a compulsory vote. I think it's actually, personally, I think it's great that Australians do have compulsory voting because I think the country is better for it, and Australians are used to standing up and having their say.
Because we know that the hard yeses will get out and vote. The hard no's will get out and vote. But it's it'll come down to the people in the middle.
It's the people in the middle.
And as you say, the women.
Yeah, and it will absolutely be the women who will move this. And I think for all of us, you know, in the future, this is going to be taught in history. And, you know, it might be your granddaughter who turns around to you and says, which side of history were you on when this vote happened? And I think people need to remember that this is a moment in time. This is a moment in time that not only women will have a significant impact on getting to the right decision, but it's also the first time for people in their 20s and their 30s who have actually been in a position to change history. And the country will be all the better for it.
Janine, thank you for everything that you're doing. Here's to the yes vote.
Thank you.
I look forward to celebrating with you on the other side.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to No Filter. To support marriage equality in Australia, as we so very much do here at Mamamia, please visit equalitycampaign.org. Remember to send back your postal survey and nag everyone in your life to make sure that they've sent theirs back too. If you want all of our podcasts in one place, you can download the Mamamia podcast app. And if you're looking for other episodes, you can scroll back through our feed and you can listen to my interviews with designer Jason Brunston and his partner Aaron and their beautiful little boy. The story that they tell about how they came to be parents is just such a beautiful one. There's also my chat with Magda Zabansky, who has her own story to tell about coming out. And I saw her on Instagram just this week. She's, like many LGBTI people, she's finding it very challenging, the whole postal survey and the no campaign. So she's bought, or a friend of hers ordered her a Wonder Woman jigsaw puzzle. So she's comforting herself with jigsaws, whatever it takes. And another interview I can't recommend highly enough is Becky Cole, the country singer, and her life partner, Libby O'Donovan, who just came into the studio and Becky proposed, actually, I think, on her 40th birthday to Libby. And the two of them are just like sunshine, like they're just human sunshine. And they are just so keen to get married. And, you know, it's up to us. It's up to us whether we return our votes, whether the yes vote gets across the line and whether the politicians do the right thing. If you want a suggested guest or just ask me a question, call the pod phone on 02 8999 9386 or flick me an email at podcast@mamamia.com.au. Today's show was produced by Eliza Ratliff for the Mamamia Women's Network.